Hey guys, it's Rachel. It is Thankful Thursday, and I'm here this week. We're going to be looking at a topic this week that my knowledge on is more limited. This week I've actually decided to help me with the topic that we've done to kind of make some notes and speak to a couple of different people, because we're going to be looking at dealing with eating disorders later in life. What that kind of feels like outside of kind of adolescence, because I know that there's still this whole idea that only young women suffer with eating disorders. I'm going to be looking at basically I want to kind of define the two types of suffering with regards to later in adulthood. I want first to consider living with an eating disorder your whole life, so going from say a teenage year all the way up until say your 40s, 50s or whatever, like a life period of an eating disorder. I also then wanted to look at a different kind of development of eating disorder, which comes actually later in life, so maybe when somebody's in their 30s, 40s, 50s and what have you, because that is becoming I don't know whether it's becoming more common, but it's certainly been documented far more. So I wanted to make that distinction. In both cases, I perhaps want to try and express how the difference in trying to recover at those ages, because of perhaps having family, perhaps having children of your own, being married. Life experiences are very different when you're a teenager in your 20s compared to in your 30s, compared to then in your 40s, and each of those kind of decades of time bring us very different life experiences, and that means that recovery, although recovery from an eating disorder has its very basics in kind of weight restoration or maintenance or loss or gain, or food patterns in building new behaviours in terms of how you eat food, how you relate to your body, the issues that are behind it, and also the lifestyle that you currently live in is going to be very different for people of very different ages. And obviously it's not just an age thing, it's a class thing, there's lots of differences, but today we do want to focus on eating disorders for those later in life. I actually, when I discussed earlier about having some knowledge, a lot of my experience has been working with adolescents and with young women. I do my best to understand eating disorders in a wide variety of cases. And yet most of my experience is with young people. I seem to connect with young people in a way that I don't with other ages. That's just me. That's just kind of why I want to work, because of that connection. However, my girlfriend is a long-term sufferer of anorexia. She developed the disorder when she was, say, 12 years of age. She's now 40. She's probably going to kill me for telling you that. And is finally in recovery for her eating disorder, for her anorexia. So I do have that perspective. I do see how difficult it is for her, and so I guess by being with her and spending that time with her, I do see the struggle with her disorder from a different perspective, and it's not particularly something that I've ever thought about with regards to her age. I see her as a person who suffers and is surviving and is hopefully going to surpass her eating disorder. And it was interesting. It was interesting to talk to her with regards to services, and I mean, in this country, and certainly from what I know, not necessarily experience because I was a little bit older, but younger, basically under 18s tend to get far better treatment than those over 18. And what ends up happening with somebody who's had a long-standing eating disorder is that they end up being rejected by services because, well, there's a number of reasons. The first, I guess, is because they have used services, and to services, if they haven't recovered, then why provide any more services for them? What also can happen is that services accept that, and this is the most common one, that they're never going to get better, and that possibly the best they could be offered is palatable care, whereby they are just simply kept alive. They are not pushed to gain weight. or remain a healthy weight, or reduce their behaviours significantly, maybe reduce them to an extent that they live a slightly better quality of life. But the expectation, the longer a person suffers with an eating disorder, and this has happened for me, and I didn't suffer for anywhere near as long as some long-standing sufferers do, the longer you suffer, the less, in my experience, the services think you are going to recover. So if you show resilience and are hospitalised numerous times or offered therapies or treatments and you don't recover, as those years pass, it becomes very easy for services to not only reject you, but for them to not believe in you. And I think actually that is worse, is being offered services, but actually being told, and I have been told myself that I was at a point whereby I was still very underweight, I was still using behaviours, self-harm and such, and I was told that this was as best as it was going to get. I wasn't on the floor like I had been, I wasn't well by any means, but where I was livable, manageable, and no, I might never work, I might never move out from home and all of that type of stuff, but I would maintain this state of existence whereby I could perhaps remain outside of hospital, but I'd never be well enough to live a full life. And that is very often what happens with somebody who has a long-standing eating disorder, because they are seen as chronic and helpless individuals. Not only is it services that tend to have this feeling, it is also family and friends, and through not necessarily any fault of their own, those around the eating disorder sufferer can start to accept that this is it. And that isn't to say that those people don't love or care for them, but they also have to get on with their lives. And if you've been battling an eating disorder with somebody for a year is hard. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, on and on and on. It's exhausting, and it becomes very difficult to constantly challenge a person with an eating disorder, because what do you want in the end? It's if you feel that it is destroying your relationship, or do you have a relationship with them and accept that this is just how things are? And I think that that's what becomes very, very difficult. When I spoke to my girlfriend, she spoke about having been exposed to older women who have succumbed to an eating disorder later in life, and this was the distinction. When I was thinking about eating disorders later in life, I was thinking about lifelong sufferers who'd been like this since they were young, but also those who develop it kind of in their 30s, 40s, 50s. And she's been exposed to people like this. As I said, a lot of my experience has been working with younger women, and although I have been in contact with those who are older with eating disorders, a lot of them were sufferers who were long-standing. And just what she's kind of said here is that those who she's kind of been exposed to have been triggered normally by loss, and now this can be loss in a number of ways. Loss of a parent or family family member. It can be a parent getting ill, being a carer for a parent, then losing them. Yeah, quite often the carer role, and then if you do lose that parent, an elderly parent, that can be an incredibly difficult loss. Loss in the sense of the shifts and changes of the family. If you have children and your children moving away, you know, the whole onwards and upwards and creating their own lives, their own families, that's becoming a little bit less common because of how expensive it is to move out. So, you know, people like me, who I'm going to be 30, is still living at home. But it's very difficult for mothers, you know, and I can say this from my experience with my own mum. And it's not that she wants to restrict me, but it's hard. And she will say, you know, I feel really lonely sometimes when you're not here. And that's not to make me feel guilty. It's just her expressing those feelings. So I think that quite often, if the family have left home and the mother has been a mother and that's been her job and it's a fucking hard job, you know, that there is this great sense of loss. You may find also that access to treatment is a little bit more difficult. It is becoming more reported that older women are suffering with eating disorders. I've discussed long-standing, but with eating disorders that are maybe triggered by a loss, say, of the family unit shifting and changing, an older body is going to find it a lot more difficult to cope than a younger body. And I think that you also need to be mindful of the different treatment required with regards to life experience, and there being a huge difference between the life of a 20-year-old and the life of a 45-year-old, and you may be treated for an eating disorder in a similar way, but okay, the issues leading up to it are going to be different because they are for everybody. But the life that you're going to go back into, if you need to maintain your recovery, you're going to need skills that are to do with, perhaps as an older person, coping with your family not being there, coping with a different lifestyle. When you're in your 20s, it can be about coping away at university, or it can be about, you know, coping with a young family. There are very distinct differences integrating work or school, whereas, you know, they're just very different skills that are going to be needed to help maintain recovery. The physical aspect is just one side to it, you know, with regards to how the body repairs. Maybe the most obvious example is perhaps, you know, when I was ill, I was sort of, you know, 18, 19. I eventually did get my periods back as I got into my late 20s, and hopefully I will be able to have children, whereas somebody who's maybe suffered for a long time, has been through early menopause, hasn't had regular periods, isn't able to conceive, and it's differences like that that make the suffering very, very different. And whilst eating disorders have very, well, a lot of similarities with regards to how they're experienced and suffered, often the circumstances that not only cause the eating disorder, but also the instances that maintain it, and therefore the environment in which one has to live in and to be able to surpass it, they all need consideration. They're all going to be different, especially with the age span. So I hope you've been okay this week, guys, and I will see you next week. Okay, bye.